Well, good morning, everybody. This is Superintendent Ibarra, and I'm pleased to be with you today and pleased that you are with me as well. I know how busy you are, so I will not waste any time and get started so we can stay on track. I do have an entourage of staff in here with me today, so I want to just take a moment. Wanted to make sure I had enough folks to answer your questions. So I want to take a moment to go around the room so that you can hear who is in the room with me today and know who is participating in this conversation. So we'll start here on my left.
Tim Hill. Jeff Church.
Marcia Beckman.
Pete Kohler.
Tim McMurtry.
Tim Corder.
Louis Conkle.
Thank you. And I was hoping they would have said their title, but I will let you know that that is for finances, communications. We have Title I and ESA waiver folks in here. We have the Chief Deputy in here. We have Special Assistant in here, and we have our Chief Performance Officer in here. So have enough people to answer your questions if necessary. So starting at the top of the agenda, spoke yesterday at Region 3 and really enjoyed that time. Looking forward to being down in Pocatello next week with superintendents, and did speak briefly about a cabinet that of superintendents that I am looking forward to putting together. So just a real 50,000-foot level, be looking for an email on or about October-ish. Looking for some volunteers to be in a superintendent's cabinet or new network, if you will. And if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to contact Dr. Chuck Zerley in the meantime. Right on to the interesting topics here. We have legislation coming out. Also, this is just a real 50,000-foot level. On the post-legislative tour, in the spring, I had several folks approach me about the math and science distribution, and I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that. So you'll be seeing possibly another email come out, and see if you are interested in us pursuing that math and science distribution piece. I do know that there's no rhyme or reason to it, and so if you're interested in us pursuing that avenue, I only heard one district that was concerned about it, so if there's more folks out there concerned about it, again, you can be watching from for an email and make sure your voice is heard on that piece. Next, I will talk about different pieces of legislation that we were looking at, and I will have Tim Corder, my special assistant, answer questions. So a couple pieces of legislation that you will see deals with charter schools. One of them clarifies excess payments made to charters and payments when a charter is intending to close down. So how we get those payments back, those are the two pieces of legislation that you'll see in that regard. You will see a piece of legislation come forward about the class size of elementaries being listed by teachers, because we all know, as a former elementary teacher myself, we do not take attendance according to by periods like the high school does. So that will be a piece of legislation that comes forward to clean that up. I'm sure you've seen in the media the superintendent qualifications piece is coming forward as well. We have a couple pieces of legislation coming out for transportation. We are going to need to clean up the bullying legislation that came out last year. It says that the State Board of Education needs to create rules surrounding professional development. We need to change that word from shall to may. And then it also kind of dictates in there that we have to have a form that we are reporting the bullying legislation on, and so we want to clean that piece up as well, so that we're not backed in the corner with using a form that maybe at some time in the future could be deleted or duplicative services. Again, in a few minutes, I'll give you the opportunity to ask questions about those. We are looking at amending the college and career counselors legislation as well. And we need to change the language in the mastery-based legislation, because as it stands right now, we cannot push any money out to the schools. So from a 50,000-foot level, that's the legislation that we're looking at for this year. That could change. It's tentative, but with that, we would stand for questions.
So for those of you, this is Jeff Church. For those of you that are on the call, you can either submit your question through the webinar form or go ahead and raise your hand and I will unmute you and then you can speak.
And I'm going to expect a member of my staff to read that to me, because I do not have my glasses on, like I never have them on.
Does your budget include money to restore funds that were reduced during the
Recession.
recession?
Yes.
Yes.
I will have Tim Hill address that question.
Yes, there's several components that address the restoration, the largest of which, let me open up a worksheet here, would be the bringing the distribution factor from its current level at $23,868 to the $25,696 that we had in fiscal year 2009, and that's going to cost $27.1 million. Now, in addition to that, we have growth of support units, but the increase from $23,868 to $25,696 is $27.1 million. The other thing we have in place here is a request to restore the reduction of $7.5 million in 33-1006, which is our transportation funding statute, subsection 8. Several years ago, the legislature codified what they did in the early years of reductions, which was 10% reduction, and that which was about $7.5 million, and they codified that a few years ago. So those are two very, very large pieces. Another piece that I guess would contribute to restoration, if you will, for those years that we didn't have any increases in the three categories of salaries. Superintendent Ibarra does have an additional 6% on top of the 1% that the Office of the Governor asked us for the salary multiplier, so a total of 7% increase in the base salary. And I would point out to you that this is not suggesting that we would raise salaries by 7%. The 7% would be sufficient dollars to do two things: to provide increases for whatever the state is recommending statewide for CEC, and for discussion purposes, let's just say that's 3%. So the other 4% would go towards closing the gap between what districts and charters are paying currently for classified staff and what they're receiving in apportionment. Currently, that's about $1.53 for every dollar that we send out. So there's a recognition that that this is, of the three categories, the largest misalignment in terms of how much is being expended versus how much is being sent out in apportionment. And we recognize that over the years, you know, professional staff such as IT, business professionals and such have put bigger requirements on your part to increase that category of salary. So those would be the big pieces.
Okay.
Thank you, Tim. The next question that we have is, can you send out the legislative changes via email to Superintendent?
I will have Tim Corder, Special Assistant, speak to that. I don't see why we couldn't. We can send you out definitely the approved list the executive team has discussed. But Tim?
Yes, Tim Corder, So our process internally is that the executive team meets and we approve which legislation is ready to go to the next stage. So there are some pieces that you will not see yet, or that we won't be ready to send out yet because the executive team hasn't approved them. But I can certainly send out all of those that have been, and that's 7 separate pieces of legislation are on that list. So if the superintendent send me an email, then you will be the ones on the list rather than blanketed across all superintendents.
Okay.
The next question that we have are, what are your feelings about Boise's SBAC resolution?
This is Superintendent Ibarra. I am aware of Boise's SBAC resolution, and I am pleased to let everyone know that I have asked that a task force supported by the governor's office be put together, that I chair, to look at some of these very concerns in moving forward. I will not promise that anything is going to happen tomorrow, as it took 8 years to put some of these things into play. We do have options that we are looking at, though, and we are still waiting for a little more data before we just knee-jerk react and make a decision. But I am aware that there's a resolution, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised and pleased that there are several folks who have the same feelings as the rest of us, and we are looking at different options. So.
Okay, the next question is, please expand on the superintendent's qualification legislation.
Sure will, and I'll have Tim Quarter speak to the superintendent qualifications legislation. Let me reiterate that we are still tweaking some things, and you may see some changes as we move forward, but I will have him speak to that.
Yes, that legislation strikes the clause that requires a bachelor's degree and inserts the requirement that is a graduate of an accredited college as determined by the State Board of Education. It also puts in the requirement that a person must have been a resident of Idaho for 2 years prior, this would be the new section, prior to an election, rather than some language that was a bit vague in there. Those are the only 2 changes: graduate of accredited college or university and 2 years residency prior to an election.
The next question is there a focus on ensuring that the upper end of the career ladder is going to be funded sufficiently?
I will let Tim Hill answer that question.
Well, if your question is, you know, the upper end is currently $50,000 as a full implementation, and that is in statute. So short of a legislative amendment, the legislature is, and I hate to use the word obligated, but there's certainly a pretty solid direction of where the legislature needs to go to appropriate those monies. And we do have roughly $39+ million in the request to fund the second year of that career ladder based on the base salary allocations in statute under 331004B.
Next question is, will the 7% allow for any additional classified FTE?
I will let Tim Hill speak to what's in the budget for the classified.
Okay, so there are 2 components that drive the salary apportionment for classified staff, one being the base salary and the other being what we refer to as the staff allowance ratio, which is the 0.375 for every 0.375 full-time equivalent, or FTE, for every support unit. So the base salary doesn't, each of them provides more dollars, but the staff allowance ratio would be the one that would fund more positions, and the base salary would fund more dollars per position. So as I look at the data for fiscal year 15, statewide, actual FTE was within 10 FTE of the apportionment, meaning that districts and charters statewide were very, very close to the FTE allowance. Now contrast that with years prior, We had a peak of about 700 back in fiscal year 2008, meaning that, just to clarify, that districts and charters hired 700 more FTE in that year. So that has progressively declined over the years, obviously for reasons of recessions and cutbacks. So to answer your question there is nothing in the request or any proposed legislation that would increase the staff allowance ratio from a 0.375 to a larger number. But just to clarify that regardless of whether you increase the staff allowance ratio or you increase the base salary, it still provides you with a larger bucket of money.
Next question is, could the superintendent please reiterate the purpose of the superintendent's cabinet?
Yes, I would be happy to. There's been a lot of change over the last several years, and the purpose of the superintendent's cabinet is, as an advisory group, there'll be several purposes for it, but as an advisory group, to increase communication, to get your voice heard, just refreshing, we are in moving forward as a team to serve our students best in Idaho. So again, if you would like further information, there'll be an email coming out in October if you're interested in joining. Right now, again, 50,000 foot level is that we would meet on a regular basis every few months, but that could change depending upon what the need is and maybe what hot button topics might be on the table or just items that we want addressed. So.
Next question is, does the 2-year Idaho residency requirement mean that districts cannot search out of the state for candidates?
No.
I guess I'm unclear as to, are we talking about legislation or are we talking about the career ladder?
No, I think what they're asking, this is Pete, if I'm wrong, just type it in. I think in the legislation that we're addressing, that is the state superintendent. It's got nothing to do with LEAs. It's strictly tied to the state superintendent. So yes, an LEA can search for anybody they want, wherever they want. We're strictly talking state superintendent.
Okay.
The next question is, what is the SDE's position on establishing a line item for health insurance?
That's a great question, and again, this is Superintendent Ibarra on the health insurance line item. I do believe there's been some rumors there will be other folks bringing that forward, so we will be on a watch status, not going to duplicate efforts. So we're going to see what comes of that on the health insurance line item.
Can I answer something else?
And Pete, I'm going to let him further answer that as well.
The thing that we have to give you just right up front, though, do understand, and we like the idea of health insurance being a separate item. The caveat with that is, if that does come to pass, don't, and I'm just giving you forewarning, don't expect discretionary funding, though, to remain at the present rate that it's going to be allocated. They will counter what goes into a health line item with a reduction in discretionary money, because they understand, whether we like to believe it or not, how that money is used. And so just understand that discretionary will be hit if we do go to a line item for medical health.
The next question is, what was the governor's and/or JFAC's initial reaction to the FY17 public schools budget?
This is Superintendent Ibarra. I didn't have to wait for a reaction. Lots of times in the education business, I love the the term reactionary services, especially as a prior vice principal and a principal. But because this was a collaborative process, it wasn't a big secret. I had lots of stakeholders at the table, including the governor's office, IASA, IEA. So they knew all along everything that we were working on, and it wasn't a big surprise, and I didn't have to worry about a negative reaction or a positive reaction. They knew what was coming, so they were supportive.
We had a few other comments and suggestions. Appreciate those. If you have any other questions, go ahead and type those in. We will wait a few minutes to allow any additional questions you may have.
And I'll move on to the next two items on the agenda so that we give folks time to type. And we'll definitely go back if you've thought about something that maybe we have not addressed. School improvement plan and the priority focus and reward schools. I know these are two separate items on the agenda, but they do go together. And so I am going to, Dr. Chuck Zimmerly, our community relations officer, is out talking to folks right now. So he's not here, but I do have Marcia Beckman with me. And she's going to talk to you about school improvement plans and what we are required to do for priority focus and reward schools and how those two things fit together. So Marcia.
Thank you, Sherry. This is Marcia Beckman, and at this point in time, just want to start with a reminder that the U.S. Department of Education did grant not only a renewal to our ESEA flexibility waiver, but at the same time, part of that was to grant a pause to any kind of naming schools or placing them in different types of categories in terms of school improvement need or what have you. So that puts us in probably a very good position, I think, given the fact that this was the first year we did the full version of the ISET test, the new test. It also means that there will be no new schools named into any categories as you're in school improvement or whatever. In fact, we had used the 5-star rating system. We're in the process of reworking that particular system. However, there are folks, and there's any good school or district really wants to look at what the indicators of their success are. If that's one of those, obviously would be based on ISET scores. It's not the only thing. But with that in mind, we're saying if you would like to work with your schools on plans that are based on the needs that you've assessed, you're welcome to do that. If you already were working on an improvement plan in the past, we'd encourage you to keep monitoring and working with that plan. We will not be assigning a requirement that anybody has to submit a plan or there won't be any new people named for that. So in the waiver, another reminder is that we feel that at this time, I think Idaho schools and districts are really ready to take on the responsibility of supporting the schools and providing technical assistance for them to write, review, give feedback, and implement any kind of improvement plan. And the state does not need to be in the business of approving those plans. So keeping in mind that. We are going to put together a template, however, for you. We actually have a scheme of it. We're just hoping that it can be something done as an online that's kind of straightforward for you to work with. However, if you choose to use any other tool that you find helpful or your district likes to work with, you are welcome to do that. So I'll just kind of go through some of the steps that we're going to be putting in that tool. First of all, we're going to ask that and you might find that you'll drill this down to specific subgroups or populations. So you want to identify where those places are. The third step is to just analyze and then prioritize. Where do you want to put your efforts for that year? You might find that you can look at a couple of different areas, determine, what might be the root causes for not meeting proficiency, prioritize those, and then determine which ones you're going to actually include in your plan for the year. Then the fourth one is to kind of define the interventions, or what are you going to do to address those particular items that you decided were priority for you for this year in those areas. And just knowing that a lot of things are already in place, be sure that you articulate each intervention strategy through something like a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, and ensure that all the groups of students are, so that you can ensure all groups of students are achieving. The fifth step in the plan will be to just define how you're going to monitor the progress of the school and how the program is being implemented and whether or not it's getting the results you're hoping for. The sixth step is really the evaluating and reassessing. So the effectiveness of that intervention or the interventions that you've decided. And at that point in time, you continue that cycle until you feel you've made the kind of progress you're looking for. Now, again, thinking in terms of having a template where you go in and you can, a lot of the work will be done in terms of what type of AMOs are there, checking off which ones you missed, then going through a process of analyzing them, some steps that would be there. So the department will be providing a template for that. It's a matter of getting our developers able to find the time and break away and finish this project. But again, there's really not the huge rush because we have this pause here. So remember that. Again, keeping going on that part of things. So that's sort of a big picture of the school improvement plan.
And just to add a little humor, this is Superintendent Ibarra. Anybody who does not want to wait for that process, feel free to just go jump right into the WISE tool. I'm sure you have plenty of time for that. So sorry, I just had to do it.
Inside joke. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sherry. So and if you are using any particular tool now, the couple that are out there, we've heard some feedback from some of our districts and schools that they're going to continue using the WISE tool because that's where they've started at this point. Some are moving to using the assist tools portion where it does address school improvement because it fits very well if you're going through accreditation. And other districts have some of their own resources that they're using. So that's what we have about that one. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
And then we'll hit
Sounds good. Okay, I think what we'll do is go on to the priority focus and reward school issue. We do have the scores from the ISAT test that was given in the spring of 2015, and with that, one of the things with the waiver that we are still required to do is decide where is the department going to put its priorities in terms of technical assistance and funding to help schools that really, really have a high need. So given that, we do have to identify and send to the U.S. Department of Education a list of the priority schools. Who are our priority at the SDE? That list would mean we are going to be looking based on just the achievement scores only, where we find the lowest 5%, and we'll concentrate our efforts there first. If there are funds and time still available, then we certainly can include everyone else in the consideration of where we would provide that help. So those would be the priority schools. And then focus schools are actually another group of schools where we look at any of the schools that have gaps, significant gaps between their all group and any one of the subgroups. So we're asked to find the 10% of schools that have the largest gaps, and we also will focus on those schools as well. The other thing to remember is this is really very different from what we used to do in the star rating system. This is really making sure that the department is putting its efforts where we need to do it first. It's our way of prioritizing or focusing, if you will, on the schools that need additional help rather than help others. That list, by the way, does not have to be the U.S. Department of Education until, and it will not be there until January 30th of 2016. So that's not going to be something released here at the department. We, of course, will have to make sure that it's publicly available. And as we get back into looking into the report card and designing what that will look like in the future, of course, there will be some place where it can be accessed by the public at that point in time. Reward schools, however, are the schools that, based on achievement only, and this has always been the case with these three categories. Reward schools are those schools that are the top 5% in terms of achievement. And we are asked to identify who those are, and we were able to get the timeline of October 30th, 2015, when we send that we have listed who those are, and we've made that list public, out to the public here in Idaho by October 30th, 2015, waiting to make sure that we have all the special education test scores are in, and those are all then calculated into the actual achievement scores. So those things are going to be coming out at that point in time. Remember, the department does receive special funding, and we also set aside special funding in three areas. One is the Title I allocation that comes into the state. We set aside 4% of that to assist schools that need support, need extra money to make sure they get their schools turned around. There is a special grant just for school improvement funds, and that is also available first to our priority and focus schools, and then to others if we have needs. The Idaho the Idaho legislature did also agree to a line item in the budget with the prior administration, and that will continue to be there, to help any schools that are not titled schools as well, who fall in these categories or who need support or general support. So those are the items and the dates for the priority and focus schools. And we will be using the achievement scores only, remember, on those, just achievement scores, since we obviously don't have growth scores, but we wouldn't have used them anyway because it's just based on achievement. So if there's questions, we're open. Okay.
So we have two questions that are associated with this topic. The first is, when will the focus, priority, and reward schools be identified based on spring 2015 SBAC scores?
That's the one that will be by January 30th of 2016. That's when the list is. We have to tell the U.S. Department of Education who that list is, and we will be notifying the schools of who they are.
But Marcia, to clarify further, we do have to we have to make public.
Yes, we do.
The reward schools by October 1st.
Right.
We do not have to make public the priority and focus schools. We just have to have that list available. But we do have to make public the reward schools by October the 1st. So I want to make that very clear. This is Superintendent Ibarra, and I want to make it very clear that it is based only on 1 year's worth of testing data. And so we are going to work very hard to make sure that that information is communicated, that all we have is the spring scores for that, and that's what it was based on. And so, excuse me, yes, the end of October, I'm sorry. But reward schools is all we have to make public. Now, that doesn't mean that someone might not ask us for those, and then we'll have to give out that information. That's the difference. But again, we'll be very clear that we only have 1 year's worth of data, and that's what we had to base that on, was the current testing scores from the spring. So hopefully that clarified that.
And a follow-up to that prior question is, will charter schools and alternative schools be separated out of the list of focus, priority, and reward schools?
Good. That's a good question. And as the department is working also with a committee from the State Board of Education to determine some of the major elements, that has certainly been something we are wanting to address, because it's a lesson we've learned from the previous five-star system, that I'm not sure if we don't separate out some of the groups, whether we're getting a good, accurate picture of all the schools that really need to have the support or the help. So that is in conversation. We haven't finalized that, but as soon as we get that finalized through the board committee is going to give recommendations to Superintendent Ibarra, and then we go to work on looking at what those models might look like and make a decision on that and then present that to the board. So that hasn't been finalized, but absolutely is being discussed very actively.
And I just want to expand, this is Superintendent Ibarra, on that conversation just a little bit further. It is called the Assessment Oversight, the Accountability, Oversight Committee, and they are examining our current accountability system since we did pause the 5-star model. And these are all of the avenues they are exploring. They are aware with mastery-based education coming forward that we're going to have something that needs to be very flexible because mastery-based education looks different to everybody. And I'm pleased to notice that one of those members, Spencer, I hope you're okay with this, one of the members of that committee is Spencer Barzee, who has joined us today on this this webinar as well. So we are looking at all of those topics that we are well aware need to be discussed and need to be part of whatever accountability system comes forward. And hopefully, I've discussed this with that committee as well, that it needs to be something that I can support as well. And I feel very confident that they are having great discussions and keeping me in the loop, and that we have plenty of folks at the table aware of some of these topics that we need to keep in the front of our minds moving forward. So please remember that we are required by the feds to have some sort of accountability model. I know I hate to hear those words too, but it is a requirement. So I'm hoping that we'll have something to share. It is due in the waiver by January, whatever we come up with. So I'm just want to let you know that we will be continuing these superintendent webinars, and I will keep you apprised of what is happening with that. So thank you, Marcia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question is, please provide an additional explanation on how insurance can be placed on a line item when districts have differing insurance rates.
This is Superintendent Ibarra, and as I stated earlier, there are a couple of different folks looking at bringing something like that forward. Depending upon what they come up with, it could look a number of different ways. But what I will have Tim Hill speak to is probably what you're probably looking for. That's why I stated earlier that we would be on watch with whatever comes forward, because I can't dictate what somebody brings forward, but a couple possibilities I will have Tim Hill talk about.
Okay, well, much like salary apportionment, which sends out monies, understanding that all of you have different salary schedules, that a comparable methodology could be put in place to distribute monies for benefits and using an amount per person, for example, that understands that you may pay more, most likely, or in a few cases maybe less than the amount of allocation. So, regardless of how much that is, the dividends, in my mind, pay off after that line item is created in subsequent years. And let me clarify that in an example. So, as you've witnessed over the last several years, it has been challenging to get more than a single-digit increase percentage-wise on our total bucket of discretionary monies. But once we carve out, let's say, the majority of our discretionary monies into a health insurance bucket, and we go to the insurance providers and get their forecasts of what they're expecting rates to go up the following year, and in the event that that's a large increase, let's just say that it's 10%, for example, I would expect that we would have a fair amount of success in requesting and receiving an increase in that pot of monies, as opposed to having them part of our $350+ million of total discretionary money. So there's a way for the legislature to carve out an amount without trying to match it up with exactly how much anybody's spending.
The next question is, please provide an update on the requirement for the use of the Danielson model for observations and provide a clarification on the requirement.
Okay. This is a twofold question, so I'm going to start with an answer, and then I'm going to have my Chief Deputy Pete finish. So I think what you're asking me is, what is that committee who is put into place that's supposed to be looking at that? What have they come up with? And so what they have come up with is they feel that the Danielson model is a good fit for Idaho, but that we have not been trained enough. And what they mean by we have not been trained enough is that we've targeted mostly administrators for training, and we haven't included teachers in that. And so we want to get away from the culture of things are being done to people, and we want to include them at the table so that there is a common understanding of the expectations. And so they would like to see us expand the training of the Danielson model out to the teaching force as much as we can, take it down into the classroom and get teachers very well versed and very well trained in the Danielson model. So those are some of the topics that they're discussing right now. I think the second part of that conversation is asking me, and please don't hesitate to type in more if I'm not answering this correctly or I am not interpreting your question correctly, but it sounds to me like you're asking what is still the requirement for the Danielson model or for being proficient in that area as far as the requirement to take that test and take that class online. So I'm going to let Pete answer that piece, is what I think you're asking me.
The Danielson model is going to stay. That's just the reality of it, at least for the foreseeable future. The question about, as we look at certification for administrators, where the old rule said that you had to have gone through the system for endorsement via TeachScape by 1 September 2018. What the law now says under 296 is for your endorsement to remain active, you have to be able to demonstrate 3 credit hours of training. Doesn't have to be Danielson. The law is not specific on that. The law simply says you have to have evaluation training. Most of you will do that based on Danielson, but that's where the new law has changed. We've still got to do some cleanup in rule, but the statute does not require the passing of it. Now, the question is there any more money left if we still need licenses? There's a little bit left, but not much, because again, each license is individual and it's $400 a license. But if you still need to get into that, get a hold of Lisa Colon and we'll see what we can scrape together for that.
The next question is, what is your opinion on parents' rights legislation, and do you foresee any changes?
This is Superintendent Ibarra again, and there's not a whole lot to say about this, so I will let my Special Assistant Tim Quarter speak to you about it.
Thank you, Sherry. This is Tim Quarter. So we can expect that there will be some more. The proponents of such legislation were not, I don't think they were completely satisfied with the results last year, so we can expect, but I don't know what it's going to look like right now. My guess is that it will still be focused around trying to relieve the burden of taking the SBAC, but there's some other motivations in there as well that are apart from the SBAC. So we can expect to see it, and we'll be watching that closely, and we'll the superintendent will advise us and kind of inform you more as we go forward and see what it looks like.
Thank you.
The next question is, would the superintendent please elaborate on the rural schools, regional rural schools and the incubators?
Oh, I would love to. This is Superintendent Ibarra, and this is probably for me one of the most exciting pieces. And maybe it's just me and I need my head examined, but I find this very exciting. We are often hear the quote in Idaho that we're, 60% rural, anywhere from 50 to 60. And we did some digging, and we are actually over 70% rural. And with that recognition, the initiative this year that I put in the budget was to start the how process of we need rural education centers, and my hope is one in each region. And my hope moving forward is I'm not going to dictate or run those. I'm going to be your partner and walk beside you and making sure that each region has a rural education center and that all the resources that you need are placed in those centers in one spot where you can easily get to those. Please remember, we're still in the how stage. I've asked for that money in the budget. Things like memorandums of understanding for job sharing, and those topics that we're dealing with, the teacher shortage conversation, all of that we know is floating out there is going to require state and district level solutions, not just one person's responsibility. So my hope is this is where universities can come into play to really help us with this. And again, my hope is that the superintendents and the regions really are the people in charge of these. And it is us as the SDE walking alongside you and assisting you in resources. I also want to reiterate that you do not have to be a rural district to tap into this resource. So hopefully I have answered that question. But again, please remember, I've just asked for it in the budget to get this how process started and moving forward, and I will make it happen however I need to, because I know it is a huge priority.
Next question is, will districts remain having access to the WISE tool login?
Marcia?
Yeah, this is Marcia. Absolutely. We are still work with Industar, which is the actual name of the group that makes that available to us. So you will still have your logins for those who would like to use those, or if someone would like to start using those, you can request logins through us here at the department.
Next question, with the top 5% identification, will a charter that has K through 12 grade have their elementary, middle, and high school reviewed separately against other like grade spans?
This is Marcia, and I know this has to do with you're talking about choosing like the top 5% performing schools. Of course, the converse is true with the lowest 5% as well. We have not yet, the committee has not yet come up with a final recommendation on how that would happen. I will just say at this point in the past, we took you with your highest grade. So if you had a K-12 school, then you were grouped in that category. Where we're going on that, I'm not sure I want to say we've made a final decision on that, but it is certainly a discussion item.
Next question, there appear to be a number of new line items in the SDE's FY17 budget proposal. Can you please give a short explanation of these new line items?
Sure, this is Superintendent Ibarra. I don't know about short, but I will do my best. So I think a lot of those are not new. They're just renamed with a little bit more common sense. For example, the math coaches. We are expanding that program and adding more coaches. And then there is the reading initiative line item, or the IRI. There have been several folks at the elementary level saying that that test needs to be examined. So that's the line item there. We have remediation / waiver as a line item. What that means is, how are we helping schools remediate that are not getting Title I services? So that's what that line item means. Literacy proficiency is closing the gap in K through 3. Again, that will be examining the IRI. Is it a right fit? There is a committee in place already looking at that, and they're not recommending any changes for this year. But we do know in the elementary level that the IRI is not quite giving us the information that we need to close the reading gap in K through 3. So We have some gifted and talented grants, some tribal language grants. Those are new, along with the multicultural grants and the school library grants, and they are just that. I am going to, in the spirit of local control, do my best to make sure that you are able to reach up and grab those grants as you need to. The multicultural grants and the school library grants are pretty self-explanatory. The school library grant was intended to, if you need new books in your library, or if you're looking at maybe training your school librarians so that they can intervene in reading interventions. Those are some possibilities that you could use those for, but we'll have more information moving forward. The Rural Schools Initiative is exactly what I talked about before. It is the money asking for the how. We actually have a meeting coming up next week on the how, and actually boots on the ground information for that and what we want that to look like. Tribal language grants are exactly that. They are out there for those folks who are interested in strengthening their tribal language. So hopefully, just briefly, I've touched on each one of those. And that's what you were looking for. Don't hesitate to continue to ask questions if there's something that I might have skipped over.
The next question is, we've spent 40+ hours completing the Teachscape training on the Danielson model. This did not provide credits, but can the certificate meet the credit requirement?
Pete?
Yeah, the answer to that will be yes. That the way you want to do that is to take, and I think it's the B7 form, but don't quote me on that one. Call Lisa. But yes, we've discussed this. You submit that form as a school district saying, here is the completed paperwork on it, and it's a one-page form, and you're granting 3 credits, and we accept that.
A follow-up to the rural conversation, will the incubator or rural regional centers be another level of bureaucracy that takes additional dollars away from school districts?
That is a fabulous question. I'm glad you asked that. So I want to clarify 2 things, though. So it's not a rural schools incubator. I want to make sure we know that the mastery-based incubator language, the incubator goes with mastery-based, meaning those are schools that are actually going to reach up and ask for the money to ask for the least amount of money possible from the state so that we maintain complete control of this at the local level. That's where I'll need your assistance. That's where I said it is not my intent to ask for money across the street to run these centers, because then that's where we get into the bureaucracy conversation. My hope and my vision moving forward is that we walk alongside you. I help you get these started, and then you grab it and run with it. It's just a matter of organizing all of our resources in one spot. I'm happy to have further conversations. I'm making sure that I have plenty of folks at the local level at the table, and this stays as far out of the bureaucracy arena as I can keep it. And one example of that is I've talked to Harold Ott from IASA. He's interested in joining us in these conversations. I've had lots of superintendents and lots of teachers emailing me saying I'd like to be at the table. So the superintendent's cabinet that you volunteer for is really going to help with that piece as well. So that is my vision moving forward with the Rural Schools Initiative, and I want to be very clear that we don't use the word incubator, because this is not going to be something that schools try. It is simply going to be centers that each region is typically running on their own as the SDE walks alongside you, helping you put those resources together. However, we have to partner with you for that. Yeah, that is a good point. As we're sitting here chatting, we can use a lot of the federal funding that we have from Title I with Marcia sitting here. to help fund some of these. So that's my hope and my vision, is stay out of asking for money across the street for that as much as possible, because again, we all know, where does it come from? It'll come from discretionary funding, and we don't need to do that. But the money that I've asked for this year is simply for the how. We are going to need folks to travel. We are going to need to get people at the table, and that's not free. So.
Another question just came in. Will there be cost sharing to keep the Educational Service Center efficient?
Will there be cost sharing to keep the Educational Service Center sufficient? I'm assuming you're talking about the rural education centers, and yes, we talked about that earlier, memorandums of understanding. I think you're referring to sharing employees. We're investigating all of that. If you're talking about cost sharing between the SDE and the rural education centers, or if you're talking about cost sharing for me asking for money in the budget, we're going to stay as far away from that conversation as we can. Moving down the road, we may make some decisions that we might need to ask for something, but again, we have federal funding for a lot of these programs, and it's just a matter of sweeping it all up and organizing it and putting it into a spot where everybody knows they can reach out and grab it. And another thing is, I have IDLA at the table with this as well. They're very interested because we'd like to start these out as virtual centers. So these are examples of keeping this very local, keeping this in your hands versus putting it in our hands or putting it in someone else's hands, and then we have to get into the bureaucracy conversation. So.
Another question just came in. How does one apply to be on the superintendent's cabinet?
I'm glad you're asking, because that tells me that you're interested. And in October, I'm having Dr. Chuck Zimmerly, our communications relations officer, send out, our community relations officer, send out an email asking for those folks who are willing to be at the table. So you can be looking for that email coming in October. And if you already know you want to serve, don't hesitate to email Dr. Chuck Zimmerly now. Looks like we're not having anybody else type, and we are finished right on time. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Please make sure you are out there. If I could ask you to encourage participation in the Idaho Challenge, which is a review of the standards. It's easy. It's on the web. It doesn't take any time away from anybody's busy day, with the exception of sit down, read the standards, and put your opinion out there. That is going to be so very important in moving forward. So if I could ask you to get the information out there, I'd really appreciate it. Again, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. This is archived if you need it, and we will continue these webinars. My plan is on a rotation of about every 2 months. You should see another one coming up to keep you well informed. Looking forward to getting around. As I promised during the post-ledge tour, I'll be on my listening tour and the regional superintendent meetings. I don't have a fancy presentation. I am there to listen. Looking forward to seeing everybody. So have a great rest of the week. And looks like I have a thank you up there, and can't tell you from the bottom of my heart how important that is. You are very welcome. Thank you.